Chapter 14. Schleiden and Schwann agree on a theory. A gentle, quiet man, full of goodwill and kindness, a man who avoided arguments and wanted only to keep on with his research. That was Theodor Schwann. He worked at the Anatomical Institute in Berlin in the middle of the 19th century, and he was the last man in the world to stir up controversy or to want change. Yet his discoveries, coupled with those of his friend Matthias Schleiden, roused arguments that resounded in every part of the scientific world. Their theory has been the basis of biological thought ever since. Schwann and Schleiden together worked out what is known as the cell theory. Schwann, the physiologist, should perhaps be given more credit for the theory, but Schleiden, the botanist, contributed. Because of their work, men first understood von Baer's germ layers and the stuff from which the tissues of animal bodies are made, and the substances of plants and tree trunks. They pointed out, in fact, the material structure of the whole living world. Their theory was all embracing and all inclusive in scope. Yet they were simple men, both of them. Schwann a little phlegmatic, perhaps, Schleiden more impatient and volatile. We are fortunate that one of Schwann's friends, named Henle, has left a description of him. He wrote, quote, "He was a man of stature below the medium, with a beardless face, an almost infantile and always smiling expression, smooth, dark brown hair, wearing a fur-trimmed dressing gown, living in a poorly lighted room on the second floor of a restaurant which was not even second class. He would pass whole days where, without going out, with a few rare books around him, and numerous glass vessels, retorts, vials, and tubes, simple apparatus which he made himself, or I go in imagination to the dark fusty halls of the Anatomical Institute, where we used to work till nightfall by the side of our excellent chief, Johannes Mueller." Unquote. Henley goes on to say, quote, "We took our dinner in the evenings after the English fashion, so that we might enjoy more of the advantages of the daylight. Our porter's wife furnished the meat, we the wine and wits. Those were happy days when the first good microscopes had been sent out from the shops of Plossi in Vienna, or of Pister and Schlick at Berlin, which we paid for by exercising a student's economies. Happy days when it was still possible to make a first-class discovery by scraping an animal membrane with a nail or cutting it with a scalpel." Unquote. The group of men who were working in the dark, fusty halls of the Anatomical Institute in Berlin were assistants of the famed physiologist Johannes Mueller. Mueller was writing an ambitious textbook on physiology, which he planned should contain no statement that either he or his assistants had not demonstrated to be true. Now, for the first time since the 17th century, great improvements had been made in the manufacture of microscopes. And this meant that scientific workers could see a great many things which even such intrepid explorers as Malpighi, Schwammerdam, and Eunig had been unable to observe. So Johannes Mueller's assistants, who saved their money to get fine instruments from the new microscope companies, made a great many discoveries. Theodor Schwann was one of the most eager and the most methodical of the group. A native of Rhenish Prussia, he had come to the Institute after long, thorough training at the universities of Bonn, Cologne, and Würzburg. He had also received a medical degree from the University of Berlin. As he worked under Johannes Mueller, he began almost at once to find out what had been unknown before. He showed how certain organisms and lower fungi could produce fermentation and putrefaction, and this paved the way for the germ theory of Pasteur. He proved at the same time that the idea of spontaneous germination was impossible, and he found out that a certain ferment, which he called pepsin, was necessary to digestion. All these are undisputed facts now, but to Theodore Schwann and his friends, the discovery was a great adventure. The work that was most revolutionary, however, and which made the name of the amiable Theodore Schwann great above those of his fellow workers at the Institute, was his work on cells. Peering down through his microscope, as many others had done before him, he examined the minute structures of the tissue under the lens and made deductions that set the world of biology on a new basis. The idea of cells was not an original one with Schwann. Back in the 17th century, Robert Hooke, in England, had examined a thin slice of cork and had said it was composed of minute cells. They reminded him of the cells in a honeycomb. Here and there, scientists had occasionally noticed them, but none of them realized the universality of cells, or that very much about them. None of them until Theodore Schwann. Could it be that all animal tissues, all organs, bones, skin, are composed of cells, he asked himself? Are they like tiny building blocks of which all animal substances are made? He looked again. Incredible, he said. Yet since he had seen it, he believed it. Could it be that every single cell is exactly like every other, the only difference then being in their arrangement? He checked his findings and checked again. He could see no reason for thinking he was wrong. He had been trained in thorough German fashion to make no deduction until he had examined a large number of cases. For many days he examined his specimens. He found no deviation from the general rule. Every animal substance appeared to be built up of cells like little building blocks, and all cells were alike. Then another idea came to him. Was it possible that not animal tissues only, but the tissues of all living things were composed of cells? Trees and plants, fungi and mushrooms, and everything else that had life in it? Were the cells the same as those that composed the animal tissues? It would take a botanist to determine that. He had a friend who was a botanist, Matthias Schleiden. He would invite him to dinner. So we introduce Matthias Schleiden. He has been called, quote, one of the strangest personalities of his age, unquote. A moody, despondent man, but brilliant. He had originally planned to be a barrister and had received his law degree with high honors. But when he started to practice law in his native Hamburg, he had no success in pleading cases, and this threw him into such despair that he tried to shoot himself. The bullet missed the mark, and he lived, but that was the end of his legal career. Now he decided he would study natural science, and soon he had won degrees in both philosophy and medicine. Botany was the branch that interested him most. Before long, he was writing brilliant books on botany. They were hastily written and sometimes inaccurate, but they attracted much attention. He was 33 years old and had already published an important work on plant cells when Theodore Schwann invited him to dinner. It is not recorded whether the restaurant in which the two scientists met was the one below Schwann's room, described as not even second class, but it does not matter. They talked. The amiable Schwann described the cells he had seen in animal tissues. Was it possible that cells in plants which Schleiden had described were like them? Schleiden must have listened with some excitement. They sat late, talking over their coffee and cigars. Finally, they left the restaurant and went to Schwann's room. There, Schwann took out his microscope, and together they examined plant and animal tissues. There was no doubt in the mind of either of them. It was Schwann who announced the cell theory. In 1838, he published an article in a German scientific periodical, and later he announced it to the French Academy of Sciences. In 1839, he followed these papers with a treatise, Microscopic Investigations on the Accordance in the Structure and Growth of Plants and Animals. The book contains 215 pages and is illustrated with 4 plates. It is one of biology's great works. In it, Schwann wrote, quote, "The elementary parts of all tissues are formed from cells in an analogous though very diverse manner, so that it may be asserted that there is one universal principle of development for the elementary parts of organisms, however different, and that this principle is the formation of cells." Unquote. Now it was clear that many riddles which had hitherto been unsolvable could be solved. Germinal layers, for instance, whose growth and folding von Baer had not been able to explain, grew because new cells were added and arranged in a particular way. The ovum and the sperm were modified cells. With their union, new cells were added till the embryo of plant or animal was made. The cell theory has been called a, quote, master stroke of generalization, unquote. It has been said that it was, quote, one of the greatest discoveries of the 19th century, unquote, or ever. But the scientists of the 19th century were by no means agreed on in their belief in it. The controversy that Schwann and Schleiden stirred up continued for 20 years. Some scientists said that the two men had insufficient proof for their assertions. They pointed to the fact that Schleiden had made some errors in his book on botany, for Schleiden was indeed too hasty in his work. No one could say that of Schwann. The manner in which the two men met this uproar of disapproval was characteristic. Schleiden, who lacked Schwann's self-control, was quick to enter controversies. He took up every battle, indulging in argument and personal vituperation. Finally, he grew so indignant that he gave up botany altogether and turned his attention to anthropology. When he died, he was working on a paper to which he had given the title, quote, "Salt, the Rose, the Horse, and Agents of Civilization," unquote. To Theodor Schwann, on the other hand, all the altercations made little difference. Quietly, hardly noticing what people said of him, he continued with his work. Those cells, he wanted to know more about them. There was so much he had not yet found out. But one man can do only so much in his lifetime, and the little units of which life is built are complex structures. Later biologists have corroborated the work that Schwann and Schleiden did. All terrestrial life is cell life, they say. No other kind exists. Every plant, from the tiniest alga to the giant redwood tree, every animal, from the microbe to the whale or the elephant, is composed of cells. The biologists have measured them. The average cell is 0.005 inches long, they say. It would take 2 billion cells, 2 billion, to fill a cubic inch. But if these tiny units are the elements of which all living things are built, what are they made of? This was a problem that Schwann and Schleiden did not succeed in solving.